The grocery store, it's apples or oranges, but not both for Claudio Monte. He says high taxes and stagnant earnings have taken a bite out of his budget. Italy's economy has barely grown over the past decade, and GDP shrank over the past 6 months. Now the government wants to put more money in people's pockets to revive spending, so it's announced tax cuts in its upcoming budget.
We hope these government measures will have a positive effect, but it would only happen later in the year. I'm not very confident.
But lower taxes would stretch the budget deficit, the difference between the government's income and expenses, to 2.5% of GDP. Rome would have to borrow to bridge this gap, pushing its debt to 135% of GDP by next year. Brussels says that's a violation of EU rules and could lead to fines of up to $4 billion, as well as other disciplinary action against Rome.
Italy is moving in an unsound direction. I would like to avoid that, and this will depend on the coming commitments to be taken by the Italian government.
But Italy's coalition government came to power on an anti-austerity mandate, and its leaders say they won't take orders from Brussels.
All the previous governments surrendered. In our case, there's a dialogue with the EU where we are the protagonists, a dialogue between equals. We will not go cap in hand to anybody.
Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte is using a more conciliatory tone, urging EU officials to defer the decision to take action against Rome.
Before expecting us to admit that we're mistaken, he should give me the opportunity to better explain our policies and our numbers.
Italian officials are considering ways to avoid a confrontation with the EU, but some of the alternatives seem controversial, like imposing taxes on assets kept in bank lockers or launching an independent currency. Such moves could scare off international investors and worsen relations with Brussels. And any disciplinary action against Rome could mean even more economic hardships for Italians. Mobin Nasir, TRT World.
And Lorenzo Codogno joins us live now from Bologna for more on this. He's the founder and chief economist at LC Macro Advisors. Welcome to Money Talks, Lorenzo. As we heard there, Italy's Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte had asked the European Commission the chance to explain itself. The European Commission sounds like it's now open to that. What can we expect to hear from the Italians?
Well, the first step happened actually yesterday with the Economic and Financial Committee giving the go-ahead for the EDP on Italy. Although what people said is that there is still a route for possible negotiations, so to speak. I think the key moment will be at the European summit on the 20th and 21st for some kind of political decision on that. Otherwise, if nothing happens, probably the ECOFIN, the European finance ministers, meeting on the 9th of July will decide to go ahead with the decision. In Italy, it is perceived as a kind of tough move, and I think the government is split. On the one hand, you have Conte and Finance Minister Tria, which seems to have a constructive attitude, and they try to avoid a procedure, and they will probably be in favor of making some strong commitments in order to adjust public finances. On the other hand, you have the two political leaders, Di Maio and Salvini, which, as you have just heard, are not willing to compromise.
Yes, and that division between the populist leaders, as you say, and I guess the more technocratic Prime Minister and Economy Minister is playing out quite publicly. Which do you think will win in the end? Will the populist coalition's policies win over the Prime Minister?
I think it's 50-50 at this stage. I think the decision will be political and probably will come at the European summit on the 20th and 21st. I have to say that EDP is not a disaster. During the crisis in 2008, 2009, 24 countries out of 28 went into excessive deficit procedure. This time, however, for Italy will be different because Italy will be alone in this situation, and it would be on debt, not just deficit, meaning that probably Italy will stay into procedure for a long while and clearly will be forced to make a fiscal adjustment. So I think the issue is clearly political at this stage, and it has to do also with the poor performance of the economy over the past 10 or 20 years, and socially, the difficulties socially to accept additional measures that might impinge on the well-being and social services. So I think that's a debate at this stage. However, I think Italy, in order to convince the European partners not to go ahead with the procedure, will have to make commitments. And we know that the current government has basically rolled back some of the reforms of the previous one. And the most important one was the pension reform, which is absolutely essential to maintain long-term fiscal sustainability.
Yes. Now, how is the coalition government in Rome justifying its big spending budget plans?
Well, they say that in order to relaunch economic growth, the only way is to lower taxes and then give a boost to demand. That, in their view, is also the way to solve Italy's budget problems. In other words, they expect Italy to grow out of its fiscal problems rather than adjusting the accounts.
Okay, as you say, we'll keep an eye on how these meetings between Brussels and Rome proceed. Lorenzo Codogno, thank you so much for your thoughts.
Thank you.